Hezbollah just claimed a massive missile strike hit a communications hub in Israel's Ha'ela Valley. And if your feed is anything like mine, the story is already being packaged in the most viral way possible. Communications knocked out, Israel blinded, game changer, the turning point. Here's what you're actually going to get from me, right now, in plain English. I'm going to give you a simple framework to separate what's confirmed from what's claimed. I'm going to explain why communications targets matter so much more than most people realize, and I'm going to give you 3 realistic paths for what happens next, so you don't get dragged into someone else's panic narrative. And I'll give you the mini payoff immediately so you don't have to wait for the point. The most dangerous thing in modern conflict isn't always the biggest explosion, it's the loss of clarity, because when clarity drops, miscalculation rises. That's the center of this entire story. Now, let's get disciplined for a second because the internet is not disciplined. When you hear Hezbollah hit Israel's communications hub, you should mentally put the story into 3 buckets. Bucket 1, what we know. Bucket 2, what is being claimed. Bucket 3, what is being sold. What we know is that Hezbollah has publicly claimed strikes on Israeli military and surveillance-related targets during this period of escalation, and they've described at least one target as a communications or satellite-linked facility in the Elah Valley area. What is being claimed, specifically, is that this was a major communications hub and that it was meaningfully disabled. What is being sold is the emotional conclusion. Israel is blind. Israel is panicking. This changes everything. Those are 3 different things, and if you can keep them separate, you become very hard to manipulate. Because headlines like this are built to do one thing before they do anything else. They try to force a conclusion. They don't want you to think. They want you to react. So let's talk about why communications hubs are such a big deal, and why they're also the perfect target for hype. In modern warfare, communication isn't just phones and radios. Communication is the nervous system. It's how sensors talk to shooters. It's how commanders talk to units. It's how warnings move. It's how air defenses coordinate. It's how decisions compress from minutes to seconds. So when you hit communications, you're not just breaking equipment, you're attacking timing. And timing is everything. Because if you can delay the other side's awareness by even a small window, you can increase the chance that they respond late, respond wrong, or respond too aggressively. That's why these targets matter, but it's also why they get exaggerated online. Because if you tell people a warehouse got hit, they shrug. If you tell people a comms hub got hit, they imagine the whole country going dark like a movie, and reality is almost always more nuanced. The question is not, was there an impact? The question is, did the strike degrade capability in a meaningful way, and for how long? Those are very different questions. Now, here's the simple framework to judge whether a communications strike is actually a big deal, without pretending you have classified data. You only need 3 questions. First, was the target truly central, or was it one node in a redundant network? Second, was the damage functional, or mostly symbolic? Third, did behavior change afterward? Because modern militaries don't build networks like a single light switch. They build them like webs. Redundancy exists for exactly this reason. Multiple links, multiple paths, multiple backups. So a strike can be real and still not produce the dramatic, blinded outcome people are trying to sell you. On the other hand, some nodes really do matter more than others, especially if they connect certain regions, certain systems, or certain types of traffic. And this is where the war becomes as much about perception as it is about hardware, because even if the actual damage is limited, the claim itself can be used as a psychological strike. If Hezbollah can convince people, even briefly, that Israel's communications are compromised, they can raise fear, raise pressure, and force the other side to respond publicly. The public response becomes part of the battlefield. Now let's get practical, because that's what most coverage skips. If a communications hub is truly degraded, you'll usually see it show up in behavior. You'll see changes in alerting patterns. You'll see changes in how information is released. You'll see shifts in operational posture. You'll see the tempo of certain operations slow or become more cautious. You'll see extra emphasis on continuity, on backups, on resilience. You might see more reliance on alternative channels, and you might see the public messaging become either unusually quiet or unusually aggressive. Those changes matter more than the first viral clip you see with dramatic captions, because in war, the first story is often a weapon, not always a lie, but a weapon to shape what you feel and what you believe. Now, let me tell you the biggest mental trap people fall into with stories like this. They assume one strike equals one outcome. They assume hit communications equals communications down. But there are layers. There's physical damage, there's performance degradation, there's temporary disruption, there's relocation and rerouting, there's resilience. And sometimes the most significant impact isn't permanent destruction, it's confusion. Even a short disruption can create a window for other actions. And that's why these stories matter, because modern conflict is a game of windows, windows of surprise, windows of confusion, windows of delayed response. Now, I want to give you one short, concrete example, not about this specific incident, but about how this pattern plays out in general, because without an example, people hear analysis and say, nice speech. Imagine two forces operating at high tempo. One side hits a key node, communications, radar, surveillance, something that ties the picture together. For a short period, the defender's picture becomes less clean, not zero, just less clean. That small loss of clarity forces the defender to make choices. Do we tighten our engagement rules to avoid mistakes, or do we loosen them to avoid missing threats? Either choice has a cost. Tight rules reduce accidental engagements but risk letting real threats through. Loose rules reduce missed threats but increase the chance of misidentification. That's why clarity is so valuable. Because clarity reduces both fears at the same time. So when you hear communications hub hit, the adult question is not, did it explode? The adult question is, did it reduce clarity enough to change decisions? Now let's talk about why Ha'ela Valley specifically is being mentioned in these claims, because the location itself is part of the story. That area is often described as central, not just geographically, but strategically, connected to infrastructure and within reach of multiple lines of operation. That makes it a tempting narrative anchor. People hear central and assume critical. Sometimes that's true, sometimes it's a shortcut. The difference is whether the site is a high-value node, a symbolic target, or a piece of a larger system. And without solid confirmation, you should treat Communications Hub as a claim, not as a verified description. Now, here's what I want you to watch for, because this is where smart viewers get ahead of the noise. Watch for convergence. In real events, credible information converges over time. In fake or exaggerated narratives, the story mutates. It grows extra details. It adds new dramatic elements. It shifts locations. It changes missile to massive barrage. It changes hit near to destroyed. It changes reported to confirmed. So track whether this story stabilizes or mutates. That's one of the most reliable ways to tell whether you're watching reality or watching a content machine. Now let's get to the part people actually care about. What does this mean for what happens next? I'm going to give you 3 realistic paths, and I'm going to keep them tight. What it looks like and what it means. Path 1 is limited impact, big narrative. In this path, the strike occurs, but the network routes around it. There's disruption, but not collapse. The real effect is psychological and political. Proof of reach, proof of intent, proof that certain targets are in play. You'll see a lot of talk, a lot of game-changer language, but operational behavior doesn't radically shift. If this is the path, the story will be used to rally support and intimidate, but the battlefield reality will look more like continuity than chaos. Path 2 is meaningful degradation, fast adaptation. In this path, the strike does degrade a key capability, maybe not permanently, but enough to force an operational adjustment. You'll see rapid hardening of networks, changes in procedures, reallocation of assets, perhaps an increase in defensive posture. The key here is that the defender adapts quickly. This is where people misunderstand modern systems. They think if something is hit, it stays broken. But in many cases, the immediate effect is disruption, and the secondary effect is adaptation. So if you see evidence of sudden procedural shifts, increased redundancy measures, or a noticeable change in operational tempo, that's a sign the strike mattered. Not because the country went dark, because decisions changed. Path 3 is a compounding window. This is the most dangerous path, and it's not because it makes a great thumbnail, it's because it increases the risk of miscalculation. In this path, even a temporary clarity drop creates a window where multiple things stack at once. Confusion plus saturation, saturation plus fear, fear plus speed, and speed plus imperfect information is how accidents happen. This is where you can see escalation without anyone wanting escalation. Because miscalculation is a chain reaction, and the chain reaction doesn't need a mastermind, it just needs pressure. So if this strike actually reduced clarity in a meaningful way, the next phase isn't guaranteed escalation, but the risk rises. Now, I promised you high retention and one mistake that people make that turns them into free distribution for someone else's narrative. Here it is, and it's a trap you've probably fallen into before. People confuse the first framing with the final reality. They take the first headline and they emotionally commit. They share it like it's confirmed, they argue like it's settled, and then when details change, they don't update, they double down. That's how you become a walking amplifier. So here's the discipline. Treat early claims as claims. Let confirmation earn your belief. And if you want to be even sharper, remember this. The more perfect the story sounds, the more suspicious you should be. Real events are messy. The viral version is always clean. Now, there's another layer to this story that matters, and it's why communications targets are such a big deal in the first place. In a saturated environment, drones, missiles, layered defenses, everything depends on coordination, and coordination depends on communications. If communications get noisy or delayed or disrupted, the whole environment becomes more dangerous for everyone in it, not just the side that got hit. Everyone, because one side tightening rules can change the other side's assumptions. One side loosening rules can create new risk. That's why people who actually understand these systems focus on the plumbing, not just the explosions. The plumbing decides how safely and how effectively a force can operate when the tempo rises. Now let's talk about what you might see next in the media cycle, because this is also predictable. First, you'll see clips and claims and dramatic language. Then you'll see denial, ambiguity, or careful statements. Then you'll see sources say reporting. Then you'll see analysis. Then you'll see a new headline that tries to replace this one before it can be verified properly. That's how attention works. So if you want to understand this, don't chase the next headline. Track what happens after the claim. Does Hezbollah repeat and escalate the claim? Do they release more evidence? Does Israel acknowledge any disruption? Do you see signs of operational adjustment? Do you see a shift in the pattern of engagements? Because behavior is harder to fake than a caption. Now, there's a reason people obsess over the phrase communications hub. It implies control over the enemy's nervous system. It implies you can turn their awareness on and off. And in the public imagination, awareness equals power. So if Hezbollah can credibly demonstrate that they can reach and damage nodes tied to communications or surveillance, it's a powerful message. But powerful messages can be true, partially true, or exaggerated. And again, the adult skill is holding uncertainty without panicking. Now, I want to land this with a clean summary that answers the title, without forcing a conclusion that isn't earned. Hezbollah has claimed a strike on a communications or satellite-linked facility in the Ha'ela Valley area. That matters because communications is the nervous system of modern defense and modern decision-making. But the viral claim that a communications hub was knocked out is a higher bar than a strike occurred. To understand impact, watch for whether the story converges or mutates and whether behavior changes, because behavior reveals whether clarity was actually reduced in a meaningful way. And the most dangerous second-order effect of any clarity loss is not headlines. It's miscalculation, because when clarity drops, the chance of wrong decisions rises. Now, I want your take, because this is where the smartest comments usually show up. Do you think strikes on communications and surveillance nodes are primarily about real operational impact, or primarily about psychological warfare and perception? And if you had to bet, which is more likely after a claim like this, escalation through follow-on strikes, or a tightening of defenses and a pause while both sides adapt? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want more breakdowns like this, fast, disciplined, and focused on what matters instead of what goes viral, subscribe.